got the distribution call, you got the placement, and somewhere between the purchase order and the shelf, something went sideways. Your product isn't there, or it's there, but it's wrong. Or nobody can tell you either way. Every CPG brand hits this wall. Most of them hit it more than once. I'm Jordan Karcher, founder and CEO of Wiley. Know Thy Shelf is a show for founders and CPG superstars who are done taking anyone's word for what's happening at the shelf. Real stories, real data. One question underneath all of it. Your product is listed as in stock. Is it though? Evan, welcome to the show. You spent the last few years building Iconic Tonics with Snoop Dogg, betting that alcohol and cannabis end up sharing the same backlog. Before we get into that, I really want to hear, how did you end up in this role in the first place? So you went from executive producing the score for a film that won an Oscar to running licensing and operations for Snoop Dogg's management company. I think a good place to start is, how does that even happen?
Yeah, very, very nice to be with you on this podcast, and thank you for the time. It's been an interesting journey. I will say that for sure. And a lot of it comes from just wanting to always be creative and be helpful and create opportunities to enable storytelling more so than anything else, and talk more about brand and everything else and how storytelling is really important around that. And, when I got out to the West Coast, originally from New York, I came out to LA and just jumped right into a lot of the creative endeavors that came from moving out with the film project and through music. And, it's just a natural evolution. I spent a long time building and advising businesses in financial services and healthcare and, hospitality and media and entertainment. And, just naturally moving to the West Coast, a lot of it felt more creative. And when I got involved in the music side with Snoop's management company, it just sort of started opening up all these opportunities for what we can be developing with and for him. So it's just, I've always had a love for hospitality first and foremost. Everything I sort of frame around this lens of being sort of in service or of service to others and providing care as the core backbone of everything that I do. And that was the same with music. Music helps you feel something. It helps you emote in a way that other types of media can't do that. And so just music was a way in the same way. If you're sitting in a hospitality experience or environment, it's how do you feel while you're there? And, do you have this sort of welcoming environment to do something? And so music was an entry point. And that sort of happened naturally from the work that I was doing and just the creative people I was meeting. And I always just find a way to, work with creatives and sort of understand the translation of that. We can all talk about wanting to do something and wanting to share an expression, but translating that into execution is really hard. And so navigating the film world to the licensing and publishing world with someone like, Snoop's management company, and then ultimately into a CPG landscape with him and helping him build different businesses has been quite a unique journey.
I bet. I think there's a lot of similarities and a lot of divergences in both the music and CPG world, but similarly, you're right. It's a storytelling business. You have to deliver a product people want. You're getting real time feedback, but I've always found the best brands are stories, which are encapsulated in a product. And so I think having Snoop as the backbone for that is a really incredible place to start. And then looking at the products, can you just walk me through some of the categories you guys explored or have launched together? And then obviously we can get to Iconic Tonics, but was it a broader net when you began?
Yeah. So when we started at the time, this is back 2011, 2012, and we started to see where some of the more sort of nuanced space where Snoop presents well. So obviously music is who he is, culture is who he is. But around 2012 to 2014, we started to see this sort of natural evolution of what I sort of frame more broadly as plant medicine coming into both adult use or medical use in California. And so we started to see this evolution of where consumers and regulatory shift was happening. And then we started to build, what would that look like for Snoop? What would be the strategy around someone like him as we're seeing an industry develop? And this at the time was the cannabis industry. And we started to look at, well, he's, first and foremost an artist. He's a very talented performer. He's an artist and he's sort of the culture, and he's created that. But he also is getting very heavily involved because of that in things like early CPG tech investing or, consumer-led tech, not necessarily CPG tech. And so that was a natural evolution for things in the sort of venture world. And he started to see, the one thing he's always had is this really unique line of sight because he's interacted with people around the world. He understands what they're looking for, behaviors. And so for him, when you see platforms like Instagram, which he was part of early, or, Robinhood or Slack or all these different platforms, or even Lyft, we saw the convergence of where he can help a brand build, be it tech or otherwise. And so we started to look at these and merge them together. And we sort of created a strategy of three different areas where one is media driven, sort of bread and butter for him. The other was brand driven because he can influence people's decisions and behaviors. And then a venture side. And I ended up helping to build and launch the venture side first, but it also then funded the brand and the media company as well. So it all sort of came together into one umbrella. So that sort of got us into how do we build ecosystems for and with Snoop? What makes the most sense? What's the most authentic for him and most endemic within what he's already doing? And, we built out that venture platform, which still exists today. He's no longer involved in either am I, but it sort of started that evolution of what does it look like to work with him? How do you build something that can scale where he's not just the face of something, it's not just an endorsement deal, but it's actually really about him and sort of moving into this next evolution was sort of that journey. So we got into venture, which is, an interesting catch-all for a lot of things if we get down into that rabbit hole. But it was always rooted in brand and influence and the cultural influence that he has. That was the starting point. We then diverged for a couple years, actually, and I went off and did a few other things, building a professional services platform to help build trust and transparency in this new emerging category that was more around accounting and finance and compliance and sort of understanding risk more broadly. At the same time, developing a more strategic and thoughtful brand and strategy agency that sort of went alongside of those things. And that's where I got into Beverage more specifically and sort of started the evolution of what happened with Iconic Tonics. But we did I did a global rebrand for basically an alcohol removal technology company. And we did a global rebrand for them. And at the time, we were looking at behaviors, not just in the US, but we were seeing that this company, BevZero, had offices in Europe and in South Africa. And so we had a very long lead to real shifts of consumer behavior, not trends, but things that are also being mandated by governments. And that was the non-alcoholic shift or people wanting something as a healthier option. That got us very much into beverage and pairing better quality base ingredients with this industry that we were developing, around Snoop, around commercialized cannabis or adult use cannabis, and merge those two as a non-alcoholic or low alcoholic plus functional ingredients to be this functional platform, Beverage being the carrier for that. And there's so many reasons why we can go into Beverage. And that was initially a platform called Harmony Craft Beverages, which is essentially an incubator and accelerator. And we piloted a few brands. And in that process, we got to see how the market was developing. We then looked and saw what was happening with the shift from regulated states and the sort of medical or adult use side to what happened with hemp, and then the transition into a traditional 3-tier model and a more national approach to building brands in the beverage category. So the extension just kept sort of developing, and that's when we sort of reconnected, and I reconnected with Snoop to then partner on and launch Iconic Tonics, which is really the same thing. It's a beverage holding company focused on functional beverages, but non-alcoholic and functional beverages to bring those types of products to the masses.
And so I think it's a really compelling part is that Snoop doesn't just throw his name on everything. It sounds like he's a vested partner and wants to build something with a little bit more substance and lasting power than just another celebrity-backed brand. And so when we talk about Iconic Tonics, I know Snoop has the lead horse, the hero brand, but you work with other celebrities, other artists, other notables. What is it like working in that context where you're building a brand behind a personality? And how does that change your go-to-market, or how does that impact how you perceive the product even when you're creating this from scratch?
Yeah, and there's a lot of different ways to think about it. And celebrity is a unique one because most of the time people see it as a fix, right? You throw a celebrity at something, it's a fix. It's not a fix. It's not necessarily going to guarantee success. It might not even guarantee awareness around something, although awareness you can almost guarantee. Whether that translates different. And, for us, it always comes down to what are we trying to build for which consumer? That's first and foremost. Like, what are we solving for? You can look at these concentric circles of audiences that he reaches and almost say, well, it's everyone. Well, that's not really something you can work with. You have to start to distill it down to say, well, what's the purpose of what we're doing and how we're going to build a brand or brands around that. So you mentioned there's a few other higher profile partners that we have, and that is true. We have Wayne Coyne from the Flaming Lips, and we have a brand with him. We have endemic influencers, people that come out of beverage and hospitality, like Warren Barbaro, who wrote the book on cannabis beverages as well. So we look at what's authentic first. What's that story? What's the origin of what we're doing and why? And how does someone like Snoop amplify that? Because if it's not about him, then he's amplifying it. But for us, it's always what's really natural for him, especially in this stage of his life and what is he trying to build. And it's infrastructure. He can impact so many different things. A lot of that is infrastructure first, in which case you have to look at whether you're funding something to go national really fast and hope that it sticks, or are you stepping back from that and saying, well, why don't we prove this first? And for me, it's always been, let's prove something first. Let's make sure it actually works in a smaller, more managed environment. And that could be a single market, and it could be a city, it could be a state versus national. And so we took over some of what was already in market. We've had to sort of revamp that. But the big part of it is for us, it's start where we know we can build something, get it right first, and then scale it. We've learned some valuable lessons trying to do this hybrid approach of, let's try and go wider. Let's be in 5 markets instead of 1. A lot of that really comes down to a resource constraint. Without a constraint, can you be national and build everything as you go? Absolutely. That's certainly a path. It's also a way to burn a lot of money really fast, especially in a category that doesn't have defined regulatory structure. So we can go build something infinitely at scale that changes tomorrow, which is what we're seeing in the hemp category. So the reason why we step back with everything with Iconic Tonics and build infrastructure first around the portfolio is we want to be here for the next 30, 40 years. This isn't necessarily a singular brand and it goes away and we sell it. That's nice. That could be an outcome. But it's how do we build an engine that can create innovation for a long period of time, regardless of the ingredient, regardless of which shelf it's going to land on, if it's landing on a shelf at all. And how do we do that with someone that has so much deep cultural relevancy, can communicate to audiences, and does ultimately feel like everyone's uncle in an interesting way? And so we want to use his ability to amplify when the time is right, because a message thrown out that you can't execute on doesn't really offer much. And so we've done a hybrid of both. We put some messaging out there. We're building infrastructure at the same time. But the main focus for us is building that infrastructure first and then having what he stands for authentically be able to be leveraged in a sort of megaphone, which he has, once that timing is right. And we're not there yet, to be quite honest with you, with the timing being right for certain products, but we are there on the conversation. I mean, the consumer has clearly spoken about their behavioral changes, the things they're looking for in their lifestyle, the intentional consumption. And it's not about eliminating alcohol. That's not what we're talking about. Consumers have already decided they're reducing alcohol or they're making different choices different parts of the day, and they want to show up differently. So that's what we built Iconic Tonics around, is the consumer conversation, the consumer shift, and how Snoop can then message to that audience.
It's a really compelling approach where you could easily just go leverage the fact that you have a massive, well-known entity, superstar, and you could do this with any celebrity-backed brand, but you're really focusing on creating the product, making it stand on its own to demonstrate success, and then amplify once you've proven that you guys can execute. Is that a fair way to state?
Yeah, that is absolutely. Yep.
Very smart. It's funny because the temptation, I'm sure, is that you could go walk into Target, or if you could, let's say this product is more limitations, but you could walk into any big box retailer and probably get distribution. And distribution is probably never the tricky part for a brand like this. It's really the velocity of the repeat purchase and the execution at scale.
That's it. You nailed it. I mean, distribution, he will open up any door for sure. Doesn't mean it's going to be a deal or otherwise, but they recognize what his influence can be. And we're navigating 2 things. We could go into Target, let's say right now, you just mentioned that. We can go into Target and be in, originally it's 1 state, now it's 3 states, 5 states, but also we don't know what's going to happen. So do we use that capital now, or do we wait till the market is defined in some ways from a retail perspective? So it's, when as an entrepreneur, when you're trying to build something, you have a lot of decisions to make. They're almost all really critical to the longevity of the business, and you're going to make mistakes all along the way. It's just a matter of recalibrating as you go. And so what we've been doing is just recalibrating. We're navigating what's happening with the regulatory landscape. We're navigating what's happening with the product quality and who can produce this and where we can produce it. So it creates the whole supply chain logistics challenges. And there's just a lot of limitations that we have to navigate, but it's important for us to sort of leverage what we can. And we're a very, very small team. You're pretty much looking at the team along with some other supportive partners and people that have been along for the ride as well. But we have to navigate that part as well. And national could be great if you have the financial resources, the hundreds of team members or partners that can support the velocity in those doors. Because, the last thing we want to have is products sitting on a bottom shelf, which is where certain early products of his were sitting. And some of them still are. So we're still in that window of trying to clean up how the original product got to market, because we didn't take the original products to market. We got asked to take them over. So that's been an interesting experience too, is navigating that transition when a product came out the market that didn't really fit the consumers where they were. It didn't fit the retail where that would have moved on its own, and it created some challenges. Now we're sort of stepping back, gaining some perspective and saying, okay, well, we understand the market's developing. We could go national and use that right now. Is now the right time? And for us, our decision is now is not the right time for that just yet.
And so maybe that's a good thing for the listeners to learn about. Can you just talk a bit about what's going on regulatory wise in your industry with PhD beverages and what the outcome could be if things get circulated? Because if you don't follow it closely, you might have no idea what's staring you down in the face right now in November.
Yeah, that's a whole podcast on its own, just with the regulatory uncertainty that we face. But just to try and summarize, you have two markets when we're talking about hemp or cannabis. You have a regulated market, which are states like California or New York, where you can go into a dispensary, buy cannabis in a drink on a shelf. That's not changing. Although there's some nuances there, but we'll leave. What is changing is on the hemp side, which a hemp-derived THC beverage in the last 3 years or so have shown up everywhere. Total Wine, Target, Sprouts, your restaurant, back bar, your taps in your brewery, breweries. And so it's taken on a life of its own. While that's being said, it was originally fit under a federal agriculture bill, the Farm Bill. And, people have called it a loophole, which in many ways it has been. And what we're seeing right now is this codification of what actually are the rules around hemp THC. There's a federal ban that's looming. It makes all products within hemp federally illegal come November 12th. And right now there are several bills that are out to resolve what that looks like. Because what it does is eliminates not just what people are maybe concerned about in the adult use category, it eliminates all the medical use of hemp as well. So they created an interesting dynamic where while there is a solve for a concern, it created many other downstream issues where you could impact people that need this as their medicine. Competing bills, DEA is looking at it for Schedule D for regulated right now. That's different than what hemp is looking at. If it does not get extended, the hemp ban, or if there's no nuance or carve out for beverage, let's say, all of this industry goes away effectively November 12th in a traditional model. Target goes away, Sprouts goes away, Total Wine goes away. What then you have again is an intrastate situation where a state on their own could decide it might be illegal federally like cannabis is now, but we know what this market is. We have really good controls around regulation and compliance and how we message a consumer. Think alcohol, 21 plus, certain merchandising restrictions, things of that nature. So there's guardrails for that. That may happen intrastate because states can decide if they don't have what's basically an automatic trigger to federal prohibition, they can choose to do that. That looks more like regulated cannabis than not. The hope still from everyone and the support from industry, the National Restaurant Association, the Retailers Association, is to make a shift to what the ban outright is. And that's either extend the period so we can get reasonable regulations, or it's leave the ban in place and reset it all, which is not ideal. And that's what everyone building in the space right now is dealing with, is that complete regulatory uncertainty around an entire segment of a product.
And and I'm just putting myself in your shoes, are you preparing for a long winter? Is it kind of like, do you get lean? Do you look for more of how much runway can we create in this process to buy time, or is it more, let's focus on a couple markets that are a sure thing, the known knowns? How do you think about this as you look at November?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's twofold. One is in CPG, it's almost the way CPG is going, being very efficient and effective in a small market, regardless of regulatory landscape, and build and scale appropriately. This gives us a whole other layer. So the one benefit we have, which we've talked about, is from a brand standpoint, we're not going to scale back on building brand because the brand isn't an ingredient. And especially when you have a personality like Snoop, we can navigate things differently than other brands. So if we're doing a lot of revenue in one specific segment, and all of a sudden that goes to zero, our brand doesn't necessarily go away. So we might shift our focus from what ingredient we can have in the market, but our approach to where we want to meet a consumer doesn't change, and how we message that consumer, the story we're telling. It's around intentional consumption first and foremost. The ingredient can shift, although the immediacy, the effect of that ingredient is important to a consumer. Like alcohol works in a short period of time, you feel it. Whereas a supplement, you have to take every day for 90 days before you feel any benefit. That's different. Whereas THC, 15 to 20 minutes in, you know what effect you're getting. And so we're navigating both right now. Navigating what does it look like if there is no limitation? And even if there is a limitation, the way that we've now been configuring the brand, and we're going through a whole rebrand process right now and resetting the business itself, is the ingredient does not dictate where the brand shows up or where we can see velocity or get traction. We're building an optionality, which is resource intensive at times too, but also if we think about the long arc of the business, it gives us resiliency no matter what the change may be. And that's the one constant we know. There's always going to be some change. It might be regulatory change, it might be something else. So the optionality we're building now for the individual brands within the portfolio is how we're focusing on maintaining the brand, and then the optionality to sort of pivot as the market shifts in the regulation.
And just curious about the product itself. How do you differentiate quality of product in this category? So I'm sure there's I'm sure like anything, like there's probably really high quality THC cannabis beverages versus low quality, high proof, low proof. I'm not the most familiar with the product itself, other than seeing you get full sets in total line, full sets in stores. It's not a small category anymore. But how do you differentiate quality of product? And is that something consumers are aware of yet that you've seen, or is it still brand driven?
Excellent questions. And it's the quality of the product, and I would even say the quality of the brand, have taken second and third position to function and experience of a singular compound. So right now, most purchasing decisions and everything else, for the most part, has been driven by potency. How much can I feel? The value of what I'm buying, not the brand, not the quality, and anything else. What we have seen, though, over the last couple of years is a broadening of quality and focus, which is great, right? Not everyone's going to be in every occasion, and you have to think about that too. So we're starting to see the fact that there's more competition. When there's no competition, a lot of times people aren't going to build for quality. They're going to build for scale and revenue generation, which generally doesn't mean it's going to be a good quality product. A lot of times brands have done a decent enough job with that. Our focus has always been quality of liquid, quality of brand, quality first. And we're starting to see that in the broader market. I think we have a long way to go. Been a lot of seltzers to start. It's easy. You can get to market fast. There's not a lot of R&D. And that was natural evolution. Oh, there's this thing happening. We can jump in. Let's do it fast and easy, right? Still decent, but it's fast and easy. Now we're seeing far more complex beverages being developed, THC specifically, and the broader functional and non-alc, we see that too. But just the quality is improving of the liquid. And at the same time, we're seeing the quality of the brands improving, which is important. What they're positioning for, why they're doing that, how they're trying to reach a consumer. It's been challenging. We've had a lot of poor quality products, and we still do, products that did not taste good at all, that you would just not drink, but you felt something. And, it's quality is interesting because you can look at alcohol too, and you look at consumer behaviors, and, alcohol doesn't necessarily taste good, right? You have to acquire a taste and a palate for that, but you'll certainly feel it if you drink enough of it. And we're seeing that start to play out in the THC category, which is, all right, you might know the effect, but now what does someone want to drink on what occasion, right? Are you bringing a fine bottle of wine to a dinner party? You want to show off that bottle of wine? You're going to get the same experience as a $2 Chuck for the most part. in terms of what's in it, but you're presenting something different. So I think that brand piece has now finally come to light. Are we on premise? Are we premium or luxury? Are we the everyday, brand? Like, what music festival do we show up in? What venues are we at? All of those things are being developed now. So we're seeing the quality being defined or better defined. We're also seeing, I would say, the consumer look for options in both quality, potency, and price point. And that's what's really interesting right now, is that this is all being developed. There's no existing market for it other than the proxy of beverage broadly and beverage alcohol specifically. So we've been building for that proxy. You have your well up to your ultra premium, and everything in between. You have your different types of spirits, obviously distilled or otherwise. And so that's where I've always seen the future of the category, and we're starting to now see that in the brands that come to market and the products that they're bringing to market. Still copycats of like, oh, that worked, let me spin it up fast and try and capture that too. But that's in every industry, in every category.
And I think maybe on the business side or execution side, similar to the uniqueness of the category being built on the fly, and obviously still learning what it's going to look like over the next 10 years. How does that impact your ability to execute on the retail level? So there are obviously 3-tier system for Bev. You're having established chains of command. You know who does what. Do you have that in this category yet, or is it still a bit of the Wild West of like, hey, we picked up a store. Who's managing? Who's the distributor? Like, how does that work in this space? And then how do you tackle some of those challenges?
Yeah, it's being developed. You brought up a couple of good points. Like, you can open a door. What does that mean now? What do you do with it? And, up until recently, very few larger distributors were willing to carry, THC brands, same thing with retailers. And so you'd have more smaller upstart mom and pop regionals, locals that were distributing. And there was what seemed to be a relationship where those distributors would do a lot of the heavy lift. And as you know, that's generally not what's going to happen, because it's a lot of extra work and they're mostly focused on logistics. And if you try to put them both together, one of the two is going to fail. You have to decide which one's more important for you. So we learned the hard way. We learned the hard way working with, and I would say for the most part, everyone's had really good intentions, but, distributors that were starting their business in this category didn't know anything about it, knew that there was a demand for it, figured out, let's carry it and then we'll figure it out. And so we've learned in working with certain distribution partners who have been great partners along the way, and hopefully we can maintain that relationship with them. This is all getting figured out. Like, what does a consumer want? We don't really know yet. I mean, now we have much better data in the last, I would say 24 months, but that's the challenge. Who's doing the boots on the ground? That, like in alcohol, you don't have hundreds of sampling agencies. You have a few on a hand that you can count on your fingers. You don't have a lot of options. So a lot of it is build it on your own, which means, again, resources and everything else. But it's the same general issues, but there are fewer solutions right now. And that's what everyone's figuring out, is how do we solve for things that don't exist, port over what's worked well from alcohol and alcohol distribution and everything else, but know that there's far more consumer education. And so again, you look for proxies. Well, where in alcohol has there been an education period to launch a new segment within that? And so we're doing the same thing with THC. You're educating consumer on the product. How does that even work in beverage? You're educating the retailer on the same thing. And everyone within the supply chain is figuring it out at the same time, for the most part.
How does the velocity compare to something in the let's say the non-alc or spirits or alc section? So is it more like a beer RTE velocity? Do you see movement that's close to a wine? So where does it land in terms of, if someone's buying a 6-pack a week? Is it 6-pack a day? Like, where do you see it kind of hitting right now?
Again, we have very limited data. So that's the other part to really think about. It depends on the channel. It's not as clear where consumers are. Certain product types act more like beer, more frequent purchases, more sessionable. Others, depending on the channel, like a liquor store, will act more like wine or a spirit, where you're buying a bottle and it's something that you're going to have over a period of time. It really does vary by channel. And that's what's so unique. Even though it's the same exact product, depending on which channel you're in, the velocity acts differently. What I would say is the majority of where we've seen velocity be consistent is in, package stores, like liquor stores, because there's consistency to it. Whereas when you go into convenience, that's not in the front of your mind. It was never really a thought to go in there for that. So we're not seeing that mean, I'm going in for X product, right? Which the velocity adjusts for that. So that's been a little bit slower than we would have wanted to see. But I would say it's a hybrid, more like beer than like wine or spirits today.
And are people drinking multiples a night? Is it like, hey, I'm going to sit down and have 4 Miller Lite? Or are you going to have one a night and it's more of a single experience and then that's going to carry you through the evening?
It's so interesting because all these things are being developed and sort of working themselves out. So many consumers, what people are anticipating is it's sessionable. You're going to have 2, 3, 4 in a session, right? You're going to be at a bar watching a game. You're going to have 4 beers or you're going to have 4 THC drinks. It's not showing up as much in the data that we're seeing. We're seeing people having it more on their own at night to either go to sleep, to unwind, to relax, versus we're going to have this as part of a sessionable experience. Again, that comes back to it's not been available in those experiences. We did a test run at a live music venue with Wayne and the Lips a couple of years ago. And what we did see is people want it to be sessionable in those occasions that you'd want to have a session. If you're at home and you're going to sleep, you don't want to have to drink 4 drinks before bedtime if that's what you're trying to use it for, is for rest and relaxation. So you want a more potent singular drink. And so that's what we're seeing play out. And there's not as clear as a distinction as you see in the existing channels of alcohol. And that's what's being developed now.
Well, I think it's probably more correlated to using, as a weed smoker, you would probably have different time because people are using it as medicine as well as a social, as well as just pleasure. And it kind of is it's varied, right? Like there's, and I'm not an expert in this category at all, but stuff that put you to sleep, stuff that makes you, and I assume that behavior mimics that more than it does of wine or beer, where it's like, I'm going to have wine with dinner and I'm going to split a bottle with so-and-so, or I'm going to drink 12 beers watching Steelers game. You kind of have that's more of a linear path of how people drink. So you guys are probably writing the playbook as this is happening.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about that too is like what you're describing is like, these are very clear delineations of where you might have something in an occasion. What's interesting with THC and there's 2 levels here. One is every THC product on the market right now is pretty much exactly the same with the active ingredient because it's all a distillate. So you might add other ingredients in, you could put in terpenes or other cannabinoids and minors, and there's a lot of complexity there. You might add another functional stack like an adaptogen or nootropic, but the THC itself is very much the same. Whereas if you were to compare a full spectrum THC drink, the nuance of what you were saying, the medical part versus I just want to have a happy experience, is far different. You don't really get that right now in THC beverages. It acts more like alcohol because we've stripped it down to a distillate. As this evolves as a market, you will have far more nuance because those experiences can be in between those easy gradients of, well, this will make me feel a certain way. Therefore, I want this version in the morning, this version during lunch, this version, in the middle of the afternoon, or this version at night. And that's what's going to be interesting over time. It adds a lot of complexity and nuance, but that is where we're going. Right now, that same seltzer is not doing anything different for you because it's the same ingredient compared to an RTD or a spirit. In the future, that spirit might make you feel different than your RTD, whereas, alcohol can't do exactly that, right? The ethanol is the same no matter where you are, be it tequila, whiskey, or beer. It obviously affects you differently because in wine, you have tannins and other things. So it has a different impact, but it's not the active ingredient that has the impact. And that's what we're seeing right now. It's not the active ingredient that's creating the impact. It's all the other ingredients that are being incorporated in THC products.
And I guess that's also a great point of, in the wine world, you obviously have varietals, appellations that influence flavor. And I believe in the marijuana world, you have that as well. But then in this, it's much more just the impact. And you want to produce more of that, let's say, broader spectrum of, I can have a different profile, different experience based off of a certain element of how it was produced or created.
Yeah. And that goes back to what's really going to last. When you think about storytelling, you think about the brand and the origin story and the terroir and the definition of what's going to present itself based on that terroir, there's a lot of nuance to that. When you have champagne from a region in France, that's specific, or, tequila is specific. And that's what's going to be interesting long term. Right now, we don't have exactly that. And I think when we get to consumers, we like that. And that's interesting for us. Like, where did this come from? Did you age it a certain way? Or how did you produce this? Oh, that I like that better than something else. If everything's vanilla ice cream, it's all vanilla ice cream, right? So now you're saying, well, I want to add chocolate syrup. I want to add caramel syrup. Or I want to add sprinkles. And that's kind of where we are right now is a lot is just vanilla ice cream, and we're adding things in. And so we have this entire palette that we've not even touched yet that we can with this particular plant itself, with cannabis specifically.
Yes.
And that's what's super cool about where we're going with all of it the next 20, 30, 40 years, what it's going to look like.
So maybe that's a good last question for us on this. You've been, building this industry up. You've seen where it is. You see where it's going. If you could go back in time, 2012, 2014, you see how things are shaping up. What would you do differently? Or would you approach this the same way? Or would you have taken a different path knowing what the regulatory challenges would be? How would you go back in time and tell Evan of 2012, this is what you should do today?
That's a really interesting question. And it's hard to say that, obviously, because hindsight, there's a lot there. But what I would say is it wouldn't be that different. What would be different is early on building more infrastructure first that really understood that compliance and regulatory nuance, and making sure the brand, while it was rooted in the culture, wasn't defined by the regulatory restrictions. And so you see a lot of brands that in the microcosm of cannabis were massive brands, but they're also super, super small that no one ever heard about. So which would you rather have, a brand that more people know about, that when they can purchase it, they have access to it, or something that's really, really big in a small sort of microcosm? One is wrong. There's no, and I always say this, like, there's no issue with having a small business that's a brand that does $300,000 a year and it's a lifestyle business versus the same type of business that can then scale to $100 million a year. Neither one's wrong. They're just different ways of building and scaling of what you want. And I would say the same thing for this industry is, if I went back 14 years now or 12 years, whatever that is, I would likely build all the same areas of need, the infrastructure part, to navigate that regulatory uncertainty, which is just, again, that's the constant is change. How do you navigate change no matter what? I would do the same things. I would probably be more focused on like the core build. Kind of what I was saying about CPG, it's efficiency, effectiveness, profitability before scale. It's kind of what we're doing now, depending on where you're coming from. If you're a VC model, it's scale at all costs. Like, you need to scale fast. That's the whole part of what you're trying to do there. I think there were certain incentives at time. There was excitement at time, like, oh, it's going to happen now. It's going to happen now. Well, those things didn't happen. And there's a lot of money that was burnt trying to chase those opportunities. And that was the model. And I probably would have focused a little bit more on how do you make it really, really, really future-proof with uncertainty. That would have been the biggest change.
Got it. Yeah, it's fair. And I think it's always challenging because the risk is part of the appeal, because that's what the opportunity lies. If it's safe, then everyone's doing it. So you're placing the bets as you go. And obviously it's worked really well to this point, but now the big bet's coming. And either you can, some people are going to go all in and be right. Some people are going to wait and see. But I think there's going to be a little bit of that pushing your chips to the middle of the table come November. People just won't survive. Unfortunately, there are Koreans that are just hanging on. They're not going to be able to survive. But if you come out the other side, obviously we all think that there's a big opportunity in this segment. It'll get professionalized at some point. At some point there'll be a structure that everyone agrees on and you can distribute. But man, if you're there for it, it could be, post-prohibition. It could be who's got the land grab. If you had the infrastructure, like you're saying, and it could be all upside come January next year.
Yeah. And it's, think about it the same way too, like technology. You can scale technology. You don't need a lot of physical presence, right? It's almost infinitely scalable. CPG can't really do that. You have to really think about it very differently, be far more intentional around all of those aspects of it. And that's kind of where it is. It's, if you can scale it and you don't run the risk of losing something when it's at scale, go for it. But if you're scaling something that could very well be flipped with a switch and off, that's that risk factor, which is also the reward. That's that multiple that you want to get based on the risk. And yeah, this is a prohibition like experience that we're going to see. A lot of the same participants that came through prohibition are going to be the same participants in this shift as well, because the infrastructure is there. And you also have to recognize that there's only so many times you can bang your head up against a concrete wall. The wall's pretty rigid. With that said, there's nuance in every industry. Consumers will dictate. Our goal has always been access and choice. Let the consumer decide and build from there.
Thank you. You couldn't have said it better. I hope nothing but the best for you guys. I hope November works out in your favor. But either way, I think you have a great brand, great product, great perspective. And if you have to pivot, I'm sure it'll pivot well. But I think this is a winner. And hopefully everybody has a chance to try it out. Always love to see supporting brands and building brands. So certainly hope everyone has a chance to try this, grab it up the shelf if it's in market. If not, visit Texas, visit a couple states, you'll be able to find it in the store.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you everybody for listening. And as always, if you heard anything that sounds familiar or pain points that your brands are dealing with, come visit us at shopwitheileen.com. Sign up for a free demo. We'll get you eyes on the shelf within a day and hopefully make your life a little easier so you can scale quickly, sleep better at night. And as always, know thy shelf.